Good afternoon. Welcome to our educational webinar, The Non-Compete Ban, What's Changing and What You Need to Know. Today's event is tri-hosted by Employco, Becker Legal, and Ringo. By way of introductions, I'm Shani Underwood, COO Managing Director of Ringo, the People Technology. Ringo is a technology platform to help manage your healthcare workforce, both clinical and non-clinical. We supply front office and back office support that streamlines efficiencies and drives productivity. I'm proud to introduce our speakers today. Today we have with us Jason Eisenhut. Jason is the Vice President of Human Resources at Employco USA and is based out of the company headquarters in Westmont, Illinois. Employco provides outsourced human resources and payroll services to companies across the country. Jason has a bachelor's degree in management and human resources from Northern Illinois University. He has over 25 years of HR experience working in various human resources roles with firms such as Maytag, the Tribune Company, and First Midwest Bank. Throughout his career, Jason has provided HR support and planning for all size employers, including small family-owned companies to large companies with over 20,000 employees. During his time, Jason has served as a keynote speaker for several events, offered HR and benefit-related articles, and currently co-hosts an HR podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Also with us today is Eric Dare, of counsel at Becker Legal, LLC, where he advises staffing firms and other clients in a variety of employment-related issues. Eric has litigated employment disputes in state and federal courts throughout the country, originally from Southeast Pennsylvania. Eric graduated law school from the College of William and Mary. Eric now resides in South New Jersey, where he does not, unlike Jason, have a successful podcast. Don't worry, Eric, neither do I. Before we start, we understand that you have questions. We invite you to please place your questions in the chat, and we will cover these during our Q&A session at the end. With that, I hope you enjoy the webinar today, and take it away, Jason.
Thank you, Shani. All right. So let's start with kind of the basic questions from square one. What is a non-compete or non-competition agreement? Basically, it's a written agreement or covenant between an employer and employee that prohibits that employee to go to work for a new competitor company after they're done working for your company. So let's say, I work for a payroll and HR company, and let's say my boss says, Jason, we're going to have you sign a non-compete. We don't want you working for ADP or Insperity or any of the other big HR and payroll companies in the industry. And usually with these non-competes, you had kind of put a geographic limitation on it and duration. But let's say he says you can't work for ADP or Insperity in the Chicagoland suburbs for a period of 1 year after your employment ends. Now, there'd have to be some kind of consideration or payment for me to sign that, usually a job or some bonus or payment, but that's generally what a non-compete is. It restricts your former employees from going to work for a competitor after they leave your company. Okay, so today there are no federal laws that ban non-compete, so it's really all at the state level if there are any restrictions. So there are a few states like California and Minnesota that have a full ban. So if you're an employee in California, you're really, really protected. It's an employee-friendly state that says your employer can't have a non-compete. You could go work for any competitor that you want if you're in California and your employment ends. There are some states like Illinois, here where I'm located, that have income restrictions. So in Illinois, you as an employer could have a non-compete with me as the employee, as long as the employee's pay or their compensation is above $75,000. Now, states like Colorado and I think Oregon and Washington, I think their income restrictions are above 100,000. So each state might have a little bit of a difference in terms of what those restrictions are. And then there's also just a partial list. There's lots and lots of states, but I just included some of the kind of the keynote states. But there are some states that have some other minor restrictions when it comes to non-competes. So for example, in New York, you can have non-competes as long as they're reasonable, but in the broadcast industry, they can't have non-competes. So really kind of some of these restrictions might apply to industries or some other parts of the non-compete world. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric.
Now, big buzz as of April 2024 is this new FTC national ban on non-compete agreements. So while there was no federal law or rule in place prohibiting non-competes with employees and employers, effective September 4th, 2024, there will be, for now. And what this rule does is it effectively bans any post-employment restriction an employer currently has in place with the employees, with some very limited exceptions. Now, with this rule, there is a notice that you have to give out to employees who have a non-compete agreement as part of their contract. Fortunately, the FTC provided some sample terms of what this notice must look like. And it effectively states the FTC issued a new rule. The new rule does not impact the terms of your current employment agreement with your employer, with the exception of the non-compete, which can no longer be enforced against you. Now, your notice doesn't have to look like the sample language that's included on the screen, but that's provided to give you a general idea of what the notice should look like. That has to go out on and before the effective date of the FTC ban, again, September 4th, 2024.
Shani, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. Let me take me off mute. Thank you both for the in-depth information into the laws and background surrounding the non-compete ban. Now for the favorite part of our webinar. Jason and Eric will engage in a hypothetical scenario to provide a real-world situation to help you better understand the implications. Jason will be portraying the CEO of a fictional hospital. They are looking for advice on the FTC ban, and Eric will play himself and provide legal advice to the fictional hospital.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to get, because I'm playing a CEO of a hospital, I really wanted to get in the character, and I tried to like make up a fake accent and what does a CEO of a hospital sound like, but I'm like, okay, in the spirit of Superman and Clark Kent and the new gymnast at Olympics putting on glasses, I just had to do something. So this is about what I'm gonna get. So I don't know. This is just still me. I'm still Jason from Employco. I know a drastic change, but this is where we're going. So I'm the CEO of a hospital.
And fortunately, there's nothing for me to put on to look more royally than I already do. So with that, we'll start the role play. Jason, thanks for stopping by this afternoon. What's on your mind?
Well, Eric, I've got to be honest. I am stressed. As you know, I help run fictional hospital, and this non-compete is really bad news and it's keeping me up at night. I don't know if it's my pillow or the bad news, but either way, I'm not getting good sleep. I don't even know what a non-compete is. I know that we include them in our contracts, but what are we even talking about?
Well, that's a good general question. In broad terms, Jason, a non-compete is a contractual term, whether written or oral, that prevents, penalizes, or functions to prevent an employee from seeking or accepting work with a different person or business after they're done working for their employer. So if your current contracts include these type of terms, once the FTC ban goes into effect, they can no longer be enforced.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more how this would apply to our hospital?
Of course, Jason. It's important to remember that the ban does not actually go into effect until September 4th of 2024. The ban is also subject to a number of legal challenges across the country. So whether it actually goes into effect on September 4th is still uncertain. Also, the FTC ban theoretically only applies to for-profit entities. So if fictional hospital is a nonprofit legal entity, then the hospital may be exempt from the ban.
That's good, because I think that means we're off the hook because we are a non-for-profit.
Well, not so fast. Fictional hospital status as a nonprofit isn't as simple as what is claimed on the tax forms. Instead, the FTC will actually look to whether fictional hospital is organized for and engaged in a charitable purpose, and whether its members derive a profit. So simply declaring nonprofit status probably is not enough to exempt fictional hospital from the FTC ban.
Okay, so I'll have my board take a look at that, see if we're truly non-for-profit, or according to the FTC, we're non-for-profit. If it ban ends up applying to our hospital, what does that mean? Are doctors and highly compensated employees free to go to the neighboring hospital and then also poach our clients, our patients?
Yes and no. The FTC non-compete ban means that employers cannot enforce these restrictive post-employment covenants or non-competes. So now, that's generally what the rule means. There is an exception for senior executives or those making more than $151,000 in a year and in policy-making position. But most physicians of your hospital probably won't fall under that exception.
Huh, I'm wondering why not. See, our doctors think they call the shots, but I mean, some degree they do.
Well, that may be the case internally at the hospital, and they certainly probably have an influence over hospital policies and directives, but a policy-making position has been defined by the FTC to relate to the overarching purpose and direction of the organization, and not just some internal policies, who gets to do what for lunch, that type of thing.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so these employees are just free. They can go to the neighboring hospital and there's nothing I can do about it?
Yes, an employer can no longer, once this ban, if it goes into effect, restrict employees or their mobility through the use of non-competes. But there are a couple of tools that still can be used, and these tools may be helpful even if this FTC ban doesn't actually go into effect. And this is the case because a number of states have actually implemented more localized bans. So there are a couple of things that can be done, even if this ban ultimately gets stricken down.
So I mean, what should I mean? Do I build a wall around their hospital, around their office, so they can't get out? I don't know what can I do?
Well, a wall might be a good start, but I don't know if you have the blue collar capabilities of building such a wall yourself, unfortunately. So let's think about this and break it down. If the employees are not actually employees, but independent contractors, then you can ask them to sign non-disclosure agreements or NDAs to protect the hospital's confidential information. The NDA, if you go that route, should probably have a provision preventing the use of fictional hospitals' assets or confidential information to benefit any other entity or organization.
Okay, I mean that's good, but I mean the vast majority of our workers are truly W-2 employees. Are we out of luck on that front?
No, not at all. Fortunately, there still are a couple of workarounds to this FTC ban. First, fictional hospital can enter into fixed term contracts that provide very similar to protections as to what a non-compete would provide. These fixed term agreements are not banned under the FTC non-compete ban because they actually don't impact or have any effect on post-employment conduct. They just govern the terms of the employment. So fictional hospital can also require a lengthy notice period in case an employee wanted to leave or get out from their fixed term contract. So if these terms are breached, then fictional hospital may have a recourse for monetary damages.
Okay, that sounds like a good option. Are there any other options?
Sure. So in addition to those fixed term contracts, fictional hospital can require employees sign the non-disclosure agreements that we talked about that could be used by independent contractors. Or they could use a non-solicit agreement. And this would prevent fictional hospitals, employees, physicians, et cetera, from going to neighboring hospital and soliciting fictional hospitals, employees, or patient base. Another way that you can try to protect yourself as an employer is to enter into agreement with employees as part of their initial agreement or what have you, that requires them to repay upfronted training costs that fictional hospital puts out in order to train and develop and enhance the skill base of its employees. So these are kind of three tools that can be used to really help work around this FTC ban. But something you want to keep in mind is that if these contracts are too favorable to you as the employer, they may function to prevent an employee from seeking post-employment with another employer. So if it's too friendly for the employer, the FTC may have a problem with that too.
Okay, great. It sounds like more legal fees. I'm sure that makes you happy as an attorney, but I'm just kidding. What happens if these agreements are next on the FTC chopping block?
Well, I wouldn't mind the additional fees, but that's not why we're here. And I can't say that I have a crystal ball, but I do know that money invested in these types of agreements upfront really can help save the expensive back-end cost of litigation down the line. A good confidentiality agreement or a good non-solicitation agreement could ultimately be worth its weight in gold.
Sounds good. Eric, I really appreciate the help. As usual, you've been great. I really appreciate your time.
Of course, happy to help, Jason.
Great. Okay. Now
All right, thank you.
take my Clark Kent glasses off and put the screen share back on. Shane, you can see my screen?
I can.
Okay, I'll fast forward. Eric?
Thank you so much, guys, for wonderful role playing. I don't know about you, but I sure learned a lot today. Eric, let's open it up for questions.
Well, yes. So now that we've all earned our awards for Best Actor and Best Supporting Actor at this next year's award ceremonies, there are a couple of developments after the FTC rule came down in April. And the first is a case down in Texas that actually came down right before the 4th of July called Ryan versus the FTC. And in that case, the judge found that the FTC lacked rulemaking authority to ban non-competes. So the judge essentially said the statute allows you to do one thing, the FTC is doing another, and therefore the FTC doesn't have authority to enforce such a ban. Now, the problem is, while this sounds like a great win for employers, the judge in that case limited the relief to Ryan LLC. So the judge granted the injunction against the enforcement of the FTC non-compete ban. So the September 4th deadline doesn't apply, but just for Ryan. So the relief that was granted in that case was really narrowly tailored. But there was another case just a couple of weeks ago in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania that offered a conflicting judicial interpretation of the FTC ban. In that case, the judge found that the FTC did not exceed its authority, could implement a national ban on non-competes, and found that the employers seeking relief by way of injunction actually did not suffer irreparable harm up to this point, so an injunction could not be granted. And now the plaintiffs in that case wanted to say that their irreparable harm would come in the form of compliance costs with issuing some of the notices that we looked at earlier, and that they would definitely be harmed because employees are now free to go, thereby harming the employer. The court said, not so fast. That harm that you're claiming is relatively minimal. The cost of sending out those notices isn't great. And also, the threat of these employees leaving is speculative. It hasn't happened yet. So the court said, I'm not going to find that you guys have actually suffered harm because no one has left yet. So where do we go? What's next? With this upcoming deadline, there are certainly probably now more questions than there are answers, especially because we have two courts saying two different things, which means ultimately this will probably get appealed and go up to a circuit court and maybe eventually to the Supreme Court of the United States before we finally get an answer. But we have this deadline of September 4th, Eric. How are we going to prepare ourselves? What are we going to do? Well, another deadline coming up is the August 30th deadline in that Ryan case down in Texas, where they found that FTC does not have, or likely does not have, authority to implement such a rule. The deadline for the judge to make a decision on the merits in that case is coming up at the end of the month, August 30th, so just 5 days before that September 4th deadline. So things could heat up even more at the end of the month and get more complicated very quickly as we head into the long weekend. So what should we do? What should we do in advance of these likely tumultuous upcoming few weeks? Well, I think employers would be smart to at least prepare the notices that the FTC requires to be distributed by the implementation deadline. So if this deadline does get triggered in early September, the notices are ready to be sent out to employees with these non-compete agreements on or before that deadline. And otherwise, employers would be smart to start considering some of these alternatives to non-competes, the NDAs, non-solicits, fixed-term contracts with their employees, to try to find workarounds in case these bans, the ban does go into effect. And in addition, because these states seem to be implementing deadlines, or not deadlines, but non-compete bans with every month and week that goes by. I feel like I'm seeing different news about different states implementing new bans. So it's definitely something to stay on top of as we move forward here.
Yeah, I personally agree. I love the non-solicitation, although you might lose somebody, at least that prevents them from stealing your clients, your patients, your employees. It's a good workaround if this September 4th ban stays in place.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we are on to question time.
Thanks, Jason. We had a couple pre-webinar questions that came in, so I'm going to cover those first. One from Gary Spinner. He says, looking to see if you can provide clarification on how this pertains to executives as the law excludes officers, and what constituents an officer responsibilities, or what constitutes an officer's responsibilities in an organization that would handcuff them to a non-compete.
So,
Eric?
Gary, thanks for the question. As we touched on a little bit during the role play, the exception applies to those in the policy-making position, titled the senior executives. What exactly does that mean? What job titles does that encompass? Unfortunately, there is no clarity on that, which is likely going to mean a fact-specific inquiry. What exactly does this person do? What role do they have at the company? And the focus is really going to be on control and decision-making authority. Effectively, does this person have the authority to bind the business enterprise? That's probably the big consideration of what is a senior executive when thinking about who's going to be subject to this role.
And then there's also the compensation. They have to earn at least 151,000 according to the FTC. At least that's the current threshold, or the new threshold.
Yep.
Thank you, Eric. Next pre-conference or pre-webinar question from Christian Wilson. How does this impact independent contractors? Any other?
Jason, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, actually, in the rule, in the FTC rule, it specifically names independent contractors as covered workers. So this ban extends to not only your W-2 employees, but also independent contractors and interns, and basically anybody that's doing work for your company.
Yeah, it's an overarching ban. Outside of the senior executives, it's pretty universally applied.
Okay, and now for our attendees today. This was the first question came in before we started. I'm sure you will cover from Julie. I'm sure you'll cover, but what can we do to protect our business other than a non-compete?
That's a good question, Julie. And we talked a little bit about that during the role play. You can enter into these fixed term contracts that binds the parties for the duration of the term. The NDAs, I've seen a couple of NDAs lately that are being enforced where employers are trying to prevent former employees from using confidential information in the course of their new employment. So that's something that can be used, as Jason just mentioned, the non-solicit. But those are really going to probably be the key agreements that you're going to want to put in place, an NDA and a non-solicit.
I took the answered Kara's question, but will this be recorded? Yes, and we will share this post-webinar. Next question from Catherine. Does this mean any employee making over 150K is not protected under the ban?
I think she say over?
Over 150K.
So I think it's
not protected.
Yes, I'm not hearing, but anyone under 151,000, doesn't matter if they're the CEO or not, they could be subject to, or they're subject to the ban. Anyone earning over 151,000, they still have to be in the senior position, policy making authority, things like that.
Sorry. Nick has asked, so just to clarify, the non-compete ban does not apply to non-employee 1099 independent contractors under fixed term contracts.
No, I think it would apply to non-employees. It does apply to independent contractors, but a workaround for a restriction on employment would be to say we have a fixed term contract. So if we have a 7-year contract, I have a 7-year contract with Jason, he can't compete with me for 7 years. So that's kind of the workaround there.
Similar question from Julie. For those we feel meet the executive exemption, do we need to formally designate them or just not give them notice rescinding their non-compete?
Eric, I haven't seen anything where you have to notify someone that it's still in place. I think if you already have, so this contract, this ban also applies if I'm hiring a new CEO and they're making 200,000. If I hire them October 1st, the ban applies. So these are only in place non-competes before are in place today.
They're kind of grandfathered.
Right.
Moving forward, you can't have them.
Shani, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry. You're on mute. I'm sorry.
Yes, I sure can. For those we feel meet the executive exemption. Can you hear me?
Yep. Sorry.
Okay. For those we feel meet the executive exemption, do we need to formally designate them or just not give them notice rescinding their non-compete?
Eric, I haven't seen, unless you know of anything else, I think you can stay silent. I don't think you have to notify them that it's still in place. I don't know. Maybe it's not a bad practice, but.
Yeah, I'm with Jason on that. I would probably err on the side of caution and say, hey, this is a ruling, it doesn't apply to you, and here's our decision why. And maybe put that in writing somewhere as a CYA, just to memorialize the decision-making process, why the decision was reached. So that way, if it ultimately comes out that the FTC thinks that the ban should apply to this employee, you could say, look, we made a good faith determination, we consulted counsel, we talked it over internally, and we let the employee know on this date what our determination was. I think that's probably a sound practice.
Thank you. Next from Tim. Does the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding the Chevron doctrine play into the FTC authority to make a ruling on non-competes?
I think a court issuing a decision in the coming month, like the court down in Texas, I think they may cite to that opinion, saying the ban cannot be enforced.
Next from Claire. Does this law pertain to current employees only, or does it need to be sent to former employees as well?
I think I saw something, if the action is already, if the agreement was already actionable, this does not apply. So if someone was already terminated and this is, the non-compete's already in effect, I think it excludes them, but we can get, unless you know, Eric, I can research and get back to them.
Yeah, I don't know. My intuition would say that the ban probably can't be enforced against them. That's just my gut, though.
Another from Tim. I'm assuming consideration has been given to NDAs and no solicitation agreements. Is this correct?
I didn't get, so in case someone doesn't know, consideration is usually in the form of a job offer, a job. Nowadays, sometimes that doesn't even like meet the requirements of a non-solicitation confidential. So usually now, at least the attorneys that I work with, consideration is usually in the form of a sign-on bonus or some monetary amount even above what their normal pay is to get in exchange for the signed non-solicitation or confidentiality or non-compete agreement. So I don't know. Eric, did you understand the question?
I think they're asking, like, if we currently have non-competes and we're looking for some alternative moving forward, what do I have to do to get this employee to sign this non-solicit? And the answer to that is you probably have to offer some kind of incentive or consideration, extra days off or something in return for this employee saying, I agree to be bound by this non-solicit, quid pro quo.
Let's see. Nick Thompson asked, what defines a fixed contract term? or fixed term contract, sorry.
Sure, a fixed term contract is a contract that has a set lifetime. So we use the 7-year contract for employment. If Jason agrees to be an employee for 7 years, that's the duration, that's the fixed term of the contract.
Nima asked, where can we get a sample letter to send out?
The FTC published a sample notice on or along with the final rule, which should be on the FTC website, but it's also in this PowerPoint, which I think will be distributed.
Letty asked, can you explain how the non-compete will affect locums agencies directly when sending providers to a client?
Eric, I
Jason, you
don't,
want to take that one?
yeah, I don't, that might be something we need to get back to the person on.
Yeah, I don't know, absent some context, how it might impact one company from another.
I can connect us with Letty. Eric asked, could a fixed term contract also have a 30-day notice?
Yeah, and I think that's a great additional way to protect yourself. So if the employee wants to leave or provide notice that they're going to leave, I think the 30 days would be a great way to protect yourself.
Letty adds some more color to her question. Will Ringo's clients, speaking, she's one of our partners, be able to solicit presented providers by an agency? So I think we need to get back to her on that
Thanks.
topic. Next question. Is an employer required to send the notice to a former employee who is still bound by the time frame of a non-compete, meaning a former employee who may be working outside the competitive industry complying with the non-compete?
So that's probably something I'll put on my homework to-do list. I'll get back to them on that. Just like even if it's a former employee who's in the middle of a non-compete, and yeah, I'll get back to the whole audience on that.
Are there best practices to keep in mind for non-solicit agreements to ensure they are enforceable? That's best thing.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that's going to vary by state. I think that you're going to want to make sure that whatever agreement you put in place is also compliant with local state requirements when it comes to non-solicit. So I don't necessarily think there's a one-size-fits-all approach that will suffice there.
And as Eric, there's a myriad of state laws that affect it, but even outside of states that don't have it, it needs to be reasonable. There can't be indefinite duration in entire United States. So reasonable duration, reasonable geographic scope, but then yeah, state specifics. I mean, Illinois, I think our non-solicitation goes down to $45,000 a year in pay. You can't have someone under that as a non-solicit, but I think that's great advice, Eric. State specific and maybe even fact specific.
Nick asks, if we have a 1099 independent contractor who has signed a fixed term contract with us for 3 months, can we extend the non-compete past the 3 months?
No, I mean, that's the nature of the fixed term would be the 3 months. And that's why the fixed term contracts are enforceable and are an alternative, because that term governs the lifetime of the employment. Once you try to start limiting what employees can do after the employment ends, that's what the FTC is defining as an unfair method of competition with this ban on non-competes. So you're really limited with the fixed term of the lifetime of the employment. Once you get outside that window, that's when you start to come potentially within violating the scope of the rule.
Michael asks, for our contracts with existing and new contracted providers, would you suggest rewriting current agreements for both client and provider? Does a notice also have to be given to each contracted provider, assuming this does go into play? Would you suggest waiting to send notices until after 9/4 or before, or simply take these issues as these issues occur? That's a lot. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah. For contracts with existing and new contracted providers, would you suggest rewriting current agreements for both client and provider? I'll stop there.
I don't know if you have to rewrite the current agreement if it includes a non-compete. I don't know if that's a necessity. Could you? I'm sure you could if you offered the correct consideration, but I think that the current ban only requires that you send a notice saying that the contract is fine as is, with the exception of the non-compete. I don't think you are required to rewrite an agreement between now and September 4th.
Second part, does a notice also have to be given to each contracted provider, assuming this does go into play? I think we answered that before.
Well, I think too, the question is a contract provider an employee under the rule? And it sounds like if you're contracting with a company, it doesn't necessarily seem like that's an employee that would be subject to the rule in the first place.
Would you suggest waiting to send notices until after prior, or simply take these as issues occur?
I would hold off on sending the notices, but I would have my finger over the send button on September 3rd.
All right, next question. John asked, for the locums tenens industry, we have hundreds of physicians on assignment as independent contractors. How do we convert them? How do we convert them from pre-September 4 status to post-September 4 status?
So Eric, I'll take a shot and feel free to jump in, but assuming they have non-competes in their agreements today, then you have to hit, and let's say the ban stays in place, like Eric said, have your finger on the trigger ready to go September 2nd, let's say, then have the notice ready to go, you send them, you don't have to, doesn't sound like it's required to edit or create a new agreement contract for them. The notice that says the non-compete part of that is no longer enforceable or valid. That's kind of how I would approach it. Eric, you have any thoughts?
I would do exactly that, Jason. And if you really want to, buckle in suspenders the thing, you can come up with a new contract that could go into effect sometime following September 4th.
John says thank you. Catherine asked to confirm, anyone making 150,000 plus and is an executive are not covered under the ban. For example, a salesperson making over 150,000 with commission would be covered with the ban and could work for a competitive company.
Yes,
Yes,
assuming that salesperson isn't a VP of sales and it's a sales organization, they have policy-making authority that can bind the whole company. But if it's just I don't know, an account manager with 2 or 3 levels above that person, salesperson earning 300 or 400,000 is subject to the ban and can go work for a competitor.
And the title alone isn't going to be dispositive, or else there would be 50,000 VPs of sales effective September 5th.
One second here. Nick asks, can a staffing agency who hires a 1099 independent contractor to work at a certain facility contractually obligate that facility to not work with that independent contractor through other state staffing agencies, as long as a non-compete is with the facility and not with the independent contractor?
I think that's probably going to be an agreement that functions to prevent an employee from exercising the right to mobility after the term of employment is concluded. So I think that's probably going to fall under the umbrella of the ban.
Tim asks, our non-compete also includes non-solicitation and confidentiality clauses. If the non-compete is no longer valid, are the other parts of the agreement still enforceable?
Eric, I'll take a shot, but feel free to jump in. If these are, let's say, just subsections within a broader agreement that the main focus is on a non-compete, I would probably err on side of contact your attorney and have a new non-solicitation agreement written up that's specific to that. But if there are three separate equal parts and equal weighting, non-compete, non-solicitation, confidentiality, then maybe it's, I don't know. But Eric, you have thoughts on that?
I think that you can probably be specific enough in the notice that's provided to the employee to say what exactly is no longer enforceable as part of their agreement. So you can say specifically the third sentence of section 3C can no longer be enforced against you. So if you really want to get that narrow into it so that the broader part of the document is still enforceable, I think that you might be able to do that. As long as you specify that the non-compete portion itself can't be enforced.
That was our last question up on the board.
Good questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Guys, next time we'll come up with an interesting topic. I'm sorry this one didn't stir any interest.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was waiting just a couple seconds more. I don't see any more questions. So thank you all for attending the webinar today. As we stated, it will be, it is recorded, and we'll get that sent out. But thank you for your time. Huge thank you to our speakers, Eric with Becker LLC and Jason with Employco. Again, we'll have FAQs with all attendees. If you have any follow-up questions or of any services, please see the contact information for Ringo, Becker, and Employco on the screen. And thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.